The galaxy had known war for millennia. Great empires clashed, fleets of unimaginable scale collided in the darkness of space, and entire worlds were reduced to nothing more than barren rock. Yet, despite all this destruction, war in the galactic age followed a predictable pattern. Battles were fought with precision, strategy was dictated by cold logic, and combat was waged with an understanding of acceptable losses. For all their power, the races of the galaxy had refined war into a calculated science. And then, humanity arrived. For 3 centuries, the conflict between the Zalvax Dominion and the Unified Stellar Compact had raged. It began as a border dispute but evolved into an unending struggle of attrition. The Dominion, a cold and ruthless empire, expanded relentlessly, consuming star systems with mechanical efficiency. Their fleets were vast, their weapons devastating, but their true strength lay in their patience. They did not need to win quickly. They needed only to outlast their enemies. The Compact, a coalition of dozens of species, fought back, but they fought by the same rules. For every world they lost, they reclaimed another, either side gaining a true advantage. Desperation set in. The war had reached a stalemate, draining resources, crippling economies, and threatening to tear the Compact apart from within. And so, in their desperation, they turned to an outsider, a species they had overlooked. Humanity. A young race, still expanding into the void, barely a footnote in the grand history of interstellar politics. Their technology was primitive by galactic standards. No energy-based weapons, no gravity-controlled shielding. Their fleets relied on crude, kinetic weaponry. Ballistic slugs instead of plasma, missiles instead of ion lances. Obsolete. Inefficient. But they could fight. The Compact had observed their wars, though they dismissed them as savagery. Unlike other species, humanity's history was soaked in endless conflict. They fought for territory, for ideology, for revenge, for reasons that made no sense to the orderly minds of the galaxy. While other civilizations built grand fleets to deter war, humans seemed to seek it. Their history was a cycle of conquest, destruction, and rebirth. And yet, despite their brutality, they always found a way to survive. When the proposal was made to bring humanity into the war, it was met with laughter. The Compact viewed them as an unpredictable, reckless force, unfit for large-scale interstellar warfare. The Dominion dismissed them entirely. A minor species with no strategic importance. What could they possibly bring to a war between giants? Then, the first human war fleets arrived. A mere fraction of the Compact's own numbers. Where the Compact deployed vast automated drone legions and heavily shielded warships, humanity arrived with crude, unarmored vessels. There were no graceful energy lances, no shimmering defensive barriers. Their ships were built for one purpose: destruction. Railgun batteries stretched across their hulls, firing tungsten slugs at velocities that ignored traditional shielding. Missile salvos darkened the stars, guided by strategies no AI could predict. Their soldiers, too, were unlike anything the Compact had seen. They did not rely on defensive formations, nor did they fight with the precision of other species. Their doctrine was built on chaos, constant movement, adaptability, aggression. The first battle was expected to be a slaughter. It was. But not in the way anyone predicted. The world of Alexis Prime had been a Dominion stronghold for nearly a century. The Compact had thrown fleet after fleet at the planet, only to be repelled time and again. It was believed to be impregnable. When humanity was sent in, it was not to win. It was to bleed the Dominion. The first wave of human dropships breached the atmosphere under withering fire. Compact observers expected them to be annihilated before landing. Instead, the first thing the Dominion forces encountered were kinetic bombardments. Not precision strikes, massive, citywide barrages designed to obliterate everything in a target zone. Energy shielding flickered and collapsed under the sheer blunt force of the assault. Then, the humans came. They did not advance cautiously. They did not set up defensive lines. They stormed forward like an unstoppable tide, adapting instantly to battlefield conditions. Dominion forces fell back in confusion. Where was the strategy? Where was the logic? Humans did not fight like other armies. They ignored losses, using terrain in ways no Dominion general had ever considered. They were relentless, pushing forward through exhaustion, injury, even certain death. And then came the psychological warfare. Dominion officers were accustomed to enemies surrendering under overwhelming firepower. Humans did not surrender. Ever. Wounded soldiers continued fighting. Trap squads fought to the last round, then the last knife, then their bare hands. Even captured humans were a nightmare. Instead of accepting defeat, they attacked their captors, detonating explosives strapped to their own bodies rather than being taken prisoner. The Dominion panicked. They had never fought an enemy that did not fear death. They had never fought an army that turned the battlefield itself into a weapon. The humans used deception, planting false heat signatures to draw enemy fire. They lured Dominion forces into terrain traps, then collapsed entire mountain ranges on top of them. They poisoned water supplies, disrupted communications, jammed sensors with primitive yet effective means. Every attempt to contain them failed. 3 days. That was all it took. Velexis Prime, a world that had withstood a century of war, fell in 3 days. The compact celebrated. Then they watched. Survivors from the battle reported horrors beyond anything the war had seen. Dominion commanders, seasoned veterans of countless campaigns, were found dead not from enemy fire, but from suicide. One had clawed his own eyes out, screaming about the demons in the fog. Others refused to speak at all. Even Dominion war machines, programmed for unwavering obedience, had been found abandoned, their pilots having fled rather than face what came for them. The compact had called for humanity's help, and now they wondered if they had unleashed something far worse. Dominion transmissions painted a terrifying picture, an enemy that did not fight for resources, or strategy, or even survival. They fought because war was in their blood. The final transmission intercepted from the Dominion High Command was brief. "They are monsters! And we have made a mistake!" The Dominion did not understand what had happened. Velexis Prime should have been untouchable. For a century, it had withstood every assault thrown at it. Its defenses were perfect, its strategies refined by generations of war. Then the humans came, and in 3 days everything collapsed. The Dominion's warlords dismissed it as a fluke. The humans had caught them off guard, exploited their overconfidence. That would not happen again. A counterattack was prepared. The Dominion mobilized reinforcements from neighboring systems, launching a massive fleet toward Velexis Prime. The humans had spread too thin, they reasoned. They had fought with reckless abandon, exhausting their resources. Now they would be crushed under the weight of the Dominion's true military might. The fleet arrived in force. Thousands of warships, their hulls gleaming under the system's twin suns. Troop carriers packed with millions of soldiers. They moved with precision, expecting to find scattered resistance, remnants of an undisciplined force. What they found instead was a planet transformed. Humanity had not stopped. They had not celebrated their victory or consolidated their position like any other species would have. They had gone straight to work. Defensive lines had been established across the entire surface, not the static fortifications common in galactic warfare, but shifting, layered kill zones. Artillery platforms were hidden within the wreckage of destroyed cities, railgun emplacements embedded in craters where Dominion strongholds once stood. Every inch of the battlefield was a weapon waiting to be triggered. The Dominion's fleet began its orbital bombardment, confident that overwhelming firepower would break the humans before ground forces were needed. It had worked on every enemy before. But this time, the enemy fired back. Railgun platforms hidden beneath the surface launched solid tungsten projectiles at relativistic speeds. The Dominion's shields, designed to counter energy weapons, flickered and failed as hypersonic slugs tore through their hulls like paper. Entire capital ships were gutted, their command decks obliterated in an instant. The Dominion faltered. This was not an unprepared resistance. This was a trap. But the assault had already begun. Drop pods launched from the surviving ships, tens of thousands of Dominion soldiers deploying onto the surface, determined to reclaim what was lost. The moment they landed, the horror began. Their first mistake was assuming humans fought like them. That there would be front lines, fortified positions, battle formations. Instead, the Dominion found themselves under attack before they had even organized. Stealth teams had infiltrated their landing zones hours before their arrival, lying in wait beneath rubble and inside ruined buildings. As soon as the Dominion set foot on the ground, they were ambushed. Snipers hidden in the wreckage fired without warning. Not at soldiers, but at officers, medics, and communications units. Leadership was targeted first. The Dominion's battlefield coordination fell apart before their soldiers even knew where the enemy was. Panic set in as commanders were picked off one by one, their forces left blind and leaderless. Then came the real slaughter. Humans did not fight with the calculated precision of other species. They fought with brutality, with deception, with a complete disregard for the enemy's expectations. They did not engage in drawn-out exchanges of fire. They struck, killed, and disappeared before retaliation could even begin. They used the battlefield itself as a weapon, rigging entire streets with explosives, collapsing structures onto advancing troops, jamming enemy communications with primitive yet devastatingly effective countermeasures. Dominion forces attempted to regroup, forming defensive perimeters around their remaining officers. That was when they realized another horrifying truth. The humans had let them land. This had never been a battle for territory. It was an extermination. Night fell, and with it came the whispers. Across the front lines, Dominion soldiers reported hearing voices, human voices, echoing through the ruins. The voices spoke in alien tongues, mocking them, taunting them. They whispered in their own language, repeating the names of fallen comrades. It was psychological warfare unlike anything the Dominion had encountered. Their soldiers, disciplined and trained, began firing blindly into the darkness. Then, the screaming started. Human strike teams moved through the shadows, picking off isolated squads with terrifying efficiency. They fought with weapons that the Dominion did not understand. Suppressed firearms, close combat blades, silent drones that delivered death without a single warning shot. One by one, entire battalions vanished into the night. Those who survived spoke of ghosts in the ruins, monsters that could not be seen, only felt. By the time dawn broke, the Dominion's forces had been shattered. What was meant to be a glorious reclamation had turned into a massacre. The few surviving commanders issued a full retreat, abandoning the planet to the humans. Their fleets, still struggling to recover from the railgun barrages, were intercepted before they could escape. Human warships, vastly outnumbered, should have been destroyed in a direct engagement. Instead, they did something unthinkable. They closed the distance. Galactic warfare was fought at long range, engagements decided by precision targeting and overwhelming firepower. But human ships moved like predators. They charged straight into the Dominion fleet, maneuvering between their formations, forcing them into close-quarters combat. Missiles and autocannons fired at point-blank range, shattering enemy hulls before they could even return fire. Boarding parties launched from human ships, breaching Dominion vessels and slaughtering their crews from within. The Dominion fleet, once the pride of their empire, was reduced to drifting wreckage. The few ships that escaped carried a message back to their leaders. A warning. Humanity was not just another species. They were something else entirely. They did not fight for honor, for expansion, or for ideology. They fought with one purpose: to win, at any cost. They did not seek battle, they sought annihilation. The Dominion's high command received the reports in stunned silence. Valexis Prime had been more than a defeat. It had been a revelation. For the first time in their long history, the Dominion understood fear. Because for all their power, for all their experience in war, they had never faced an enemy like this. And worse, they had no idea how to stop them. The Dominion could not allow humanity to continue. The war had lasted for centuries, yet nothing had shaken their empire as much as this new adversary. Losing a battle was one thing. Losing control was another. The enemy was not just fighting to win. They were waging war in a way the Dominion had never encountered: no hesitation, no mercy, no interest in negotiations. This was not how wars were fought. This was something far worse. Orders were issued. Every available fleet, every reserve force, every remaining stronghold was mobilized. The Dominion did not just want to retake lost territory. They wanted humanity erased. Entire sectors were pulled from defensive positions, leaving the front lines of the war against the Compact vulnerable. It didn't matter. Nothing mattered except stopping what had begun. The assault was planned with absolute precision. Humanity's forward bases would be overwhelmed before they had time to react. Their supply lines would be severed. Their fleets would be crushed by sheer numbers. There would be no battle, only extermination. The first targets were the outer colonies. The Dominion descended in overwhelming force, unleashing orbital bombardments before their troops even landed. Planets burned under relentless fire, cities turned to rubble in minutes. The Dominion did not intend to give humanity the chance to fight back. There would be no survivors. They would erase every trace of this species before they could spread further. Then, something happened that had never occurred in the history of galactic warfare. The humans did not retreat. Any other species, when faced with such overwhelming force, would have surrendered, fallen back, or attempted diplomacy. But the humans did none of those things. They dug in. They fortified. They let the Dominion come. At first, it seemed like madness. The Dominion's fleets hammered the colonies, unleashing destruction on a scale no world could withstand. But when they landed, expecting broken resistance, they found something else entirely. The humans had transformed every city, every outpost, every settlement into a death trap. They had collapsed tunnels, flooded streets with burning fuel, turned entire districts into elaborate ambush zones. Every inch of the battlefield had been planned in advance. The Dominion thought they were taking planets. In reality, they were walking into mass graves, graves prepared just for them. Then came the counterattack. Humanity did not just defend, they retaliated. They sent strike teams deep behind enemy lines, sabotaging fuel depots and supply stations. Dominion warships, once part of a perfectly coordinated assault, began losing communication, their command centers destroyed in precision raids. Entire battalions were stranded without orders, left vulnerable as human forces picked them apart piece by piece. The Compact watched in silence. They had expected humanity to be wiped out within weeks. Instead, they witnessed something unprecedented. The Dominion, the most disciplined war machine in the known galaxy, was unraveling. Their fleet movements became erratic. Their soldiers hesitated. Fear had taken root, and no amount of reinforcements could stop what was happening. The Dominion had fought countless wars before, but they had never fought a species that refused to lose. The turning point came when the humans initiated what the Dominion would later call the Scorched Stars Protocol. It was not a defensive measure. It was not a strategic withdrawal. It was revenge. Rather than focus on defending their remaining colonies, humanity began targeting the Dominion's infrastructure. They struck shipyards, orbital factories, command stations, critical locations that had nothing to do with battlefield victories but everything to do with long-term survival. The Dominion, despite its strength, was a vast empire dependent on logistics. Their supply chains spanned entire sectors, designed for slow, methodical expansion. Humanity shattered that foundation in weeks. They did not just destroy resources. They poisoned them. They introduced bioweapons into water supplies, corrupted targeting systems with malicious code, turned Dominion technology against itself. They rigged abandoned ships to explode when salvaged, infiltrated data centers to feed false intelligence to the Dominion's own commanders. Every attempt to recover from their losses was met with new, more horrifying setbacks. Captured Dominion officers described it best. They do not care about the rules of war. They fight as if survival is irrelevant. We kill one of theirs, they kill 10 of ours. We take a planet, they burn a fleet. We are not fighting soldiers. We are fighting something else entirely. What terrified the Dominion most was not the destruction, it was the realization that the humans were learning. They were adapting. Every tactic the Dominion used against them was studied, broken apart, and repurposed. The next time they fought, humanity had already devised a countermeasure. Weapons meant to overwhelm them were disabled before they could be fired. Defensive formations that should have repelled them were bypassed as if they didn't exist. They were evolving in real time, and no amount of firepower could stop them. The Dominion had begun this campaign with a simple goal: the annihilation of humanity. Now, for the first time in their empire's history, they questioned whether that was even possible. Every victory they achieved came at a greater cost than the last. Every planet they took became a graveyard of their own making. They were running out of ships. They were running out of soldiers. Worst of all, they were running out of time. The Compact, once content to watch from the sidelines, began to reconsider their position. Humanity had been brought into the war as a desperate gamble. Now, that gamble had changed everything. The Dominion was no longer an unstoppable force. It was bleeding. And the humans were only getting started. The Dominion's warlords gathered for an emergency council, their once unshakable confidence replaced with something far more fragile: panic. They had underestimated humanity. That mistake had cost them more than just territory, it had cost them the certainty of their own supremacy. The Dominion had always believed itself to be the inevitable victor, a force that would outlast all others. But against humanity, attrition was not an option. The war was no longer about conquest. It was about survival. The Dominion had to make a decision. They could continue, pouring everything they had into a fight that seemed increasingly unwinnable. Or they could end it before it was too late. But even as they debated, even as they hesitated, they knew one thing with absolute certainty: humanity would not stop. Not until there was nothing left of the Dominion but ashes. The Dominion's War Council had never known fear, but now it consumed them. Their fleets were bleeding out, their armies shattered, their supply lines collapsing under the relentless human assault. The war was no longer about strategy. It had become a fight for survival, and they were losing. Every decision they made, every maneuver they attempted, was countered before it could even take effect. Humanity had learned too much, too quickly. Desperation led to extreme measures. The Dominion turned to weapons they had long considered too terrible to use: planetary sterilization devices, biological warfare, scorched space doctrines that defied the rules of war. They deployed entire fleets armed with nothing but planet killers, determined to erase every trace of humanity. If the humans could not be beaten on the battlefield, then their worlds would be reduced to nothing but lifeless rock. But humanity had already prepared for this. They had seen the Dominion's shift in tactics and had anticipated their next move before it even began. The moment the first Dominion sterilization fleet launched, humanity struck. Not with defense, but with annihilation. They did not try to intercept every attack. Instead, they went for the source. Human infiltration teams, smaller in number but unmatched in effectiveness, struck deep within Dominion territory. They bypassed battle lines, ignored fortified worlds, and went straight for the Dominion's critical command structures. Supply hubs, strategic depots, fuel refineries, each one became a primary target. What the Dominion had failed to understand was that humanity did not believe in defensive wars. They did not fight to hold ground. They fought to destroy their enemy's ability to wage war at all. The first major blow came when a human strike force infiltrated the Dominion's largest shipyard orbiting the fortress world of HFY. The shipyard was responsible for over 30% of the Dominion's fleet production, a facility thought to be impenetrable. It fell in a single night. Explosions tore through its infrastructure, and before security forces could even react, entire sections of the station were venting into space. The humans had not come to disable it. They had come to erase it. The loss set back Dominion fleet production by years. Worse still, these attacks were not isolated. Within weeks, more of these deep strikes crippled key military installations. Orbital foundries were left in ruin. Ammunition depots erupted in massive fireballs. Communication networks were severed, leaving entire sectors of the Dominion's war machine in disarray. Humanity did not attack at random. Every target was carefully selected, each one a critical piece of the Dominion's infrastructure. Then came the final blow. The Dominion had assumed that their homeworld was untouchable. It was the beating heart of their empire, surrounded by countless defensive fleets, shielded by the most advanced fortifications in existence. No enemy had ever dared to approach it. But humanity did not operate within the expected bounds of warfare. They did not need to break the Dominion's defenses. They only needed to send a message. At the height of the war, as the Dominion scrambled to contain the growing chaos within their empire, a single human vessel managed to breach their home system's security perimeter. It was not a warship. It carried no heavy weapons. It did not engage in battle. Instead, it released a single payload, a package that drifted silently through space before crashing into the Dominion's capital city. There was no explosion, no loss of life. What the Dominion found instead was something far more chilling. The package contained records, footage, transmissions, battle reports. Every moment of the war, every atrocity, every failure had been documented. And with it came a final message transmitted across every open channel in the Dominion's language. We are not coming for your territory. We are not coming for your resources. We are coming for you. Panic spread faster than any fleet ever could. The Dominion had long believed themselves untouchable, the apex of galactic power. But now, for the first time, they understood what they were truly facing. Humanity had not just fought them. Humanity had studied them, dissected them, and turned their own weaknesses against them. They had been outmatched not by technology, but by sheer, relentless will. The War Council met in secrecy, their pride shattered. They had once laughed at humanity's inclusion in the war. Now, they whispered in terror about what would happen if it did not end soon. The Compact, seeing the Dominion's growing instability, pressed the advantage, launching full-scale offensives across multiple fronts. But it no longer mattered. The Dominion's true enemy was not the Compact. It was the species they had underestimated. Humanity had changed the nature of war. The Dominion could not defeat them. They could not even contain them. They had unleashed something they did not know how to stop. And now, with every passing moment, the inevitable became clear. This was not just a war anymore. This was extinction. The Dominion's leadership had ruled for centuries, their authority unquestioned, their dominance absolute. They had crushed rebellions, annihilated rivals, and expanded without opposition. But now, they faced something they had never encountered before, an enemy that did not break, did not surrender, and did not stop. Their empire was collapsing, not in slow decline, but in rapid, violent destruction. The war was no longer a battle for control. It was a struggle to avoid annihilation. Desperation consumed them. They had thrown every weapon, every fleet, and every last strategy at the humans, and it had not been enough. Their war machine had been gutted, their shipyards reduced to floating wreckage. Communications between their sectors had devolved into chaos, with commanders issuing conflicting orders, warlords breaking away to protect what little they had left. The Empire was no longer functioning as a unified force. Humanity had not just defeated them in battle, they had shattered their very ability to wage war. There was only one option left: diplomacy. It was unthinkable. The Dominion had never needed to negotiate. They dictated terms, they did not beg for peace. But now, survival meant swallowing their pride. Messages were sent in every known human frequency. Transmissions carried across what remained of their fleets. They offered concessions, territory, reparations, anything to end the war before it was too late. Humanity responded with silence. Panic spread through the Dominion's command structure. They had been prepared for any response except this one. They had expected demands, ultimatums, some sign that negotiations were possible. But the lack of a response made something terrifyingly clear. The humans had no interest in peace. They had no desire for treaties or compromises. They were not seeking an end to the war. They were finishing it. The Dominion's leaders turned to the Compact, the very coalition they had sought to destroy. They pleaded for intervention, for mediation, for anything that might stop the humans before their empire ceased to exist. The Compact did nothing. Why would they? The war had turned against the Dominion so completely that it no longer made sense to interfere. The Dominion had been an unstoppable force, an oppressive power that had held the galaxy in fear for generations. Now, that same galaxy watched as they crumbled under the weight of their own mistakes. Then came the final strike. The Dominion's homeworld, the last true stronghold of their civilization, had stood untouched for millennia. Its defenses had once been considered impenetrable, its fleets unmatched. But now, its skies were empty. Its fleets were gone, its armies scattered across dead and dying worlds. The last remnants of the Empire gathered in the capital, believing they had days, perhaps weeks, before the humans arrived. They were wrong. The attack came without warning. Human ships, having bypassed every remaining defensive line, descended upon the planet in overwhelming force. They did not deploy vast ground armies. They did not prepare for occupation. There was no battle, no engagement, no resistance. Humanity did not come to conquer. They came to erase. Strategic targets vanished in precise, coordinated strikes. Military headquarters, industrial centers, supply depots, every critical piece of infrastructure was wiped out in hours. The Dominion's leadership, huddled in their last fortified bunker, watched in horror as their empire's legacy burned around them. They sent one final message, one last desperate plea for surrender. Humanity answered, not with words but with action. A single kinetic strike, a weapon simple in design yet devastating in execution, tore through the heart of the Dominion's capital. The bunker that had protected their leaders for generations was reduced to nothing but dust and debris. With it, the last command structure of the Dominion ceased to exist. The war was over. Across the galaxy, silence followed. The Dominion, the empire that had once threatened to consume everything, was no more. Their fleets had been obliterated, their armies decimated, their homeworld left in ruins. Humanity had not just won. They had ensured that the Dominion would never rise again. And then, just as suddenly as they had arrived, the humans disappeared. Their fleets withdrew, their forces pulled back from the wreckage of their enemy's empire. They made no demands. They took no spoils. They left nothing but destruction in their wake. The compact, now the dominant power in the galaxy, hesitated to reach out. No one knew what humanity wanted. No one understood what their true goal had been. Had they fought for vengeance? For justice? Or had they simply removed a threat that stood in their way? One thing was certain. The galaxy would never forget what had happened. The war that had once seemed inevitable, an endless cycle of conquest and resistance, had ended in a way no one had foreseen. The Dominion had believed they understood war. They had believed they were the greatest force the galaxy had ever known. But they had never faced humanity. And now, they never would again.